your evening with us tonight. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Shanta Lee Gander, who is a writer, a photographer, and a journalist whose work has been featured in numerous print publications as well as on Vermont Public Radio. She is the 2020 recipient of the Arthur Williams Award for Meritorious Service to the Arts, as well as the 2020 gubernatorial appointee to the Vermont Humanities Council's Board of Directors. More recently, Shanta Lee was named Diode Edition's full-length book contest winner for her debut poetry compilation, Ghetto Claustrophobia, Dreaming of Mama While Trying to Speak Woman in Woke Tongues, which was published in June. Furthermore, her work as an investigative journalist for The Commons, a weekly newspaper covering Windham County, Vermont, has received several New England Newspaper and Press Association awards. This woman of many, I'm sorry, can you guys hear that? I'm just gonna close the door.
Yeah.
Oh, real life.
Okay.
I was going to go on to say that Shanta also gives lectures on the life of Lucy Terry Prince, who was born around 1730 and is considered the first known African-American poet in English literature. Shanta has an MFA in creative nonfiction and poetry from the Vermont College of Fine Arts. She also has an MBA from the University of Hartford and an undergraduate degree in women, gender, and sexuality from Trinity College. So Shanta, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you. And so what I'm going to do, I can't see everyone's faces just yet. I'm just going to shrink this so I can see and take you. It's my kind of, I did say to Allison as we were planning and promised that I'm not going to throw in the stuffy word of aesthetic. I respect it as a word, but this is not going to be an artist talk where you hear me say, this is my aesthetic. But instead, I hope you to just share with you, as I was thinking about Dark Goddess Speaks and talking about the behind the scenes, oopsies, of Dark Goddess, just thinking about how I would explain or approach my approach, not only just to this project, but some of the other projects that I've been embarking upon, especially because I'm multidisciplinary. So what you see, and I would say this is probably true of a lot of different artists, is just the surface and looks like a finished product, but something that has, I like to say, been living in my body for about 6 years. It started just as an idea of what would it look like if we explored the other sides of the goddess, as opposed to the stereotype of, women in that position or in that pantheon as maternal or nurturing or caring. I was interested in something a bit darker. So what is this project really about? If I were to boil it down to some of the main ideas of Dark Goddess, definitely pieces of the ethnographic. So an exploration, an opportunity for some individuals to dig into their cultural heritage and storytelling and bring that into the space of creating some of these photos. Certainly not a requirement, but it opened the playing field. In some cases, individuals created deities. They didn't necessarily, it wasn't one of these situations where I said, and this brings me to the next point of collaboration, it wasn't necessarily a situation of, hey, here's Hecate, I want you to be Hecate, or I want you to be the Morrigan. It was more of a situation of saying, well, here's the concept. It's about the Dark Goddess and the other side, debunking the stereotype of what we think of the goddess and doing some world building, a term usually applied in writing and fiction. But I actually would offer up that world building is something that happens across different areas of art making. And so something I said, and consuming with each individual, but not consuming, but maybe perhaps what we were consuming were ideas and our planning and contemplating what their photo shoot was going to be, and then circling back and saying, here's what I have, here's what I've chosen, just to give you an idea, just so that people weren't taken by surprise. But also, if there was something that I deemed should be in the exhibition, but someone, let's say someone just really didn't want that image to be there, that's totally fine too. So giving people control of their image, which is something, as we know, in the tradition of photography, is usually not the case. Also, excavation, definitely a process of asking each and every individual to explore. Um, it's also been an opportunity for me to, I like to look at my art making and approach to it as being a student, being an eternal student, someone who is doing a deeper dive, specifically as it relates to dark goddess and what does that mean. Um, and pressing back against the stereotype. And we also tend to lean against a very white pantheon, and over rely on a white pantheon. And so, what does it mean to challenge that? So, for me as an individual, there are many things in my approaches to my writing, to my photography, to a lot of things. Um, I consider myself a Renaissance woman. I only want to continue to explore and add to that. I'm an adventurous. I love playing beneath the surface. I'm a multi-potentialite, as they call it, somebody, many passions, many interests. They're not scattered. There is something that's really common among all of them, and that includes looking beneath the surface and inquiry of self, inquiry of others. But if I were to take this a step back, and way before Dark Goddess, way before picking up the camera, thinking about where did this start for me. So there is a story behind this image. And when I was a little girl, there's a book of fairy tales I had. My family and I became homeless when I was, oh God, how old was I? Maybe between the ages of 9 and 10 years old. And what happened, some stuff ended up in storage, never to be seen again. And we were bouncing around. As I ventured into adulthood, there were images that just stuck with me in terms of some of the books and some of the things that I had. I grew up in a household where there were books, where I was read to. And there was one image a bunch of images from the illustrations of Janet and Anne Graham Johnstone. And this is just one example of what they did with Princess and the Pea. Part of the reason, actually, why I like really high beds, I always wanted to picture myself as the princess and the pea. But also, this image is something I went in search of. So I want to say maybe it was couple of years ago, I went in search of this image because it was something that stayed with me, and wondered if it was the image that I had constructed or if it actually was from a book from childhood. And I found the book. I think it's like a 1977 edition. I was born in 1978, 1977 edition of a fairy tale book. And so this is as much about visual culture as it is about textual culture for me, and some of the things that just stayed with me. And why, going beneath the why inquiry of the self and others, why digging beneath the cellar hole. So I would call it a lifelong courtship with curiosity. So what you see in this collage, this right here happens to be a book that came to the house when I was living on Harold Street when I was a little girl. It was one of those things where I don't think they can get away with it now, but they would send you a book and hope that you would end up in this subscription and get all the other books in the set. Well, so this one book out of everything else, I was able to carry with us as we left that house, or had to leave that house. And it was something, again, I was really interested. I think this is the volume that has Atlantis in it, Flying Dutchman. And so I kept rereading looking at all the images. You also see the Bible. That's actually my grandmother's Bible that she gave me. It's actually, I don't think you can see it close enough, but it's turned to the book of Job. I was very interested, asking why of some of these biblical stories. They seemed both interesting and fantastical, and that's an understatement. There's like way more that I could say about that. There's also the story of King Arthur. And one summer when I was younger, I had this book that was just falling apart. Not this specific book, it was another book. And I read it and ate it up, and the whole, Knights of the Round Tables. Also, other books that were just laying around the house, like Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space. And I don't know why my mother had that book, but it was just laying around. I also, another one of her books that I happened to pick up, and I'm not ashamed, even though I have a friend who said this whole collection of books should be held underwater until bubbles surface, which I find hilarious. But I'm not ashamed for the fact that the VC Andrews series, when I look back and think about all the different layers, whether you're talking about the Flowers in the Attic series or some of the other series where you have a matriarch and a woman who's become by life, and how did she become, and thinking about some of there's a lot of different horror and trauma that happens to young women and girls in these series as they're on the brink of becoming women. And so I'm able to articulate that now. When I was younger, they were just interesting family sagas, and I couldn't get enough of them. And I'm sure there's something in story and the depth of that and the whys that kind of fed how I see and how I work as an artist. There's also, as I got older, went to college, undergrad especially, I took an anthropological class. So John Berger's Ways of Seeing was very huge as a book for me, in terms of thinking about image, in terms of thinking about the visual, in terms of thinking about how things are put next to each other, and thinking about technology and time and impact. There's also another one I'd be remiss not to mention, this book by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola, Essays, Women Who Run with the Wolves. As you could see, so this is my copy, all tagged up, and well loved over and over and over again, and something that, yes, directly relates to the Dark Goddess, but also relates to my deep love and connection to story, to myth making, to tales, to all sorts of things. I was introduced to this, I want to say, at the age of 19 years old, and then continued to stay with the book and continue to go back to it often. So what I'm really talking about is visual culture within visual culture. And I think that even though there's the surround or the concentric, what I would view as concentric circles around our seeing and our being within the bigger culture, but also within the culture of our homes, our neighborhoods, our heritages. I think there's also what we create or try to create or develop as our own ways of seeing, or vehicles for seeing. So with that in mind, one of the things that helped to shape my ways of seeing is where I'm from. So this is Hartford. There was the aerial shot of downtown, but then there's also, I did not shoot this footage, something that I borrowed. You see just riding around certain neighborhoods. Now, where they're about to go, this Albany Avenue stretch, when I was a little girl, it looked like you could get anything on Albany Avenue. It seemed like a big fantasy land, partly because I didn't have that much accessibility to freedom. Here, another thing that shaped my ways of seeing and being an inquiry is Oprah and Barbara Walters, and my ability to ask the tough questions. And so, definitely something that got into, that became infectious for me in terms of why journalism, or reporting or digging beneath the surface. I definitely think Oprah had a hand in that. Writing became a daily bread. It became my way of telling when I couldn't tell to other people in my household. But also the fun stuff. I can't underestimate the power of the MTV culture. When it launched in 1981, I was 3 years old. And just the sheer storytelling or the anticipation of, a world premiere video, and, what did it mean to see these moving images paired with music in such a way to where you would tune in a way that I think is, it still exists, but not quite in the same way. MTV really was its own culture. And so I couldn't resist including this in my presentation in terms of my ways of seeing and how it impacted me growing up. This is, I think I got way too happy with the imagery for MTV. And there's one more thing after this, after Boy George. Again, really key part, but also, even though Michael Jackson may be very complicated for some, I do remember this world premiere of Thriller. And I remember Michael Jackson, for me, representing, oh, wow, you could do something that creative with storytelling and imagery and making music videos into this bigger thing. So bringing different things together to create a story, I would say, is huge. Also, not to underestimate urban as a possibility for the Gothic. So what you see right here is where I used to live. We eventually moved to 280 Collins Street after being homeless and growing up. And so this is where I spent the rest of my time, from middle school going into high school. So that's what it looks like now, because it's been condemned and shut down. And it's just, but before it looked like that, I always found this building that's appeared in many dreams and many things to be really, really fascinating. For me, it looked like it ate people. It felt that way, like it ate lives. So in combining and thinking about all of that, because I definitely want to get to questions, here are some other images of things that sort of catch my eye in terms of how I think about, I'm not going to use the A word, but some of my ways of seeing and experiencing. This is from India. Very easy to capture images from India. This is from out west, driving through the Midwest a few years ago. I just saw so much that I loved. There are also the people. So the photo on the right is from a joint photography project that I did with Liz Livornia called Perfect Imperfection, in which we worked with people to talk to them about what they perceived as either real or imagined or things that they're still working on as their imperfections. And so that also gave me a window into collaborating with individuals on photography. Again, I thought, pick up a camera, do what you want with the camera. When I was younger, not necessarily thinking about that individual, not as object, but as collaborator, as someone who, and going against how Susan Sontag has rightfully critiqued the art. I wanted to buck against that and really think carefully about how I was engaging with individuals. The image on the left were a part of a series of photos in which this individual wanted to be different personalities. So this is just one of the personalities she chose, and she actually dressed up and manifested different personalities. We didn't get a chance to finish the whole project. The other part of the project would have included interviewing her as she was those personalities. We didn't quite get to make it to that part. She lived in Canada at the time. I lived here, and I think we did one photo shoot in one sitting, but there's a whole bunch of interesting photos from that collection. There's also, I sometimes really love doing photo shoots just because this is with a couple of friends who, as you can clearly tell, are reimagining of Alice in Wonderland. Here is another couple of favorites. I think this might be just before these two young ladies went to college. And so just they were hanging out and they let me photograph them, and I enjoyed it. My other love is, and it's hard to know whether or not I prefer taking pictures more of things than people. They might be tied at this point. I love abandoned places. I love nothing more than breaking into abandoned places. This is an old asylum. I believe this one somewhere is in Massachusetts. And taking photographs of things that are just left. Now, this statue right here isn't just left. It is in the Vatican. What I found interesting, many things I find interesting about the Vatican, but we were being rushed going into the Sistine Chapel, but literally, depending on what side you were on, this group, because it was just the easiest way to see all this stuff, being rushed by all these things that were allegedly found in different places. And I consider this some level of abandon as well. They're there and there's so much of it. So I was able to kind of linger off and on and take a few photos. Another example of the abandoned on the right, especially Presidio Modelo in Cuba. And it is actually the prison where Fidel Castro and his brother were kept for some time. And it is based on the idea of Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon. I was so taken by it because I was not really aware of the Illinois Chicago prison that's also based on the Panopticon vision. And I'd never seen one. I only read about it in undergrad. On the left, you see these, there are these reliefs, these balustrades, and there were a number, not a lot of them, but walking down one of the streets in Cuba, just these figures that I saw. And the rest of the building may look like either that it's in a different state of disrepair or repair. Not in every case, but I just found these figures to be very interesting. They're not full body, just usually like a bust or from the neck up. This is from India, I want to say 2011, 2012, along the Ganges. Another abandoned image. This, I believe, is in Virgins. One of my rules is that you never take anything from these places. Try to leave things as they are. And so this is, obviously it's a doll, but either a well-loved or well-loved and forgotten doll that was there that kind of struck me. I almost stepped right on it as we were walking around. I believe it's Elgin Springs, which is interesting, which is right here in Vermont. It was a spot for the water cure. And as some of you may already know, we were known for having healing waters. I want to say late 1800s, going into the 1900s. And people often believed that if you went and got into healing water, somehow it would be very helpful. And so Elgin Springs is one of the sites for that movement, now long abandoned. And I will stop share because that is just letting you know where I got that image for John Burr. So that's the end of my presentation, and would love to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Shanta. I was actually wondering if you could go back to that first slide that has the whole Dark Goddess series.
Sure.
Just so we can spend a little bit longer with those images.
Absolutely. Oh, did I do something stupid? Give me 1 second. It's always interesting. Okay, here we go. and go here. This should be very easy. And okay, share. Cool. And here we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Is that better? And I will make so I can see people say, there we go. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And this is not, I should say, this is not the whole body of work. Yeah, I have a lot of images, and I'm not going to say that necessarily the work is done either. There are some gaps that I'm trying to address. The exhibition is going next up further up north. I'll be able to announce that at some point officially, but unofficially, it does have placement in the spring, but it's not going to be in its current format.
Oh, that's very exciting. Congratulations. I can't wait to find out where it's going.
Thank you.
And that actually, so that was one of my questions as you think about like Dark Goddess 2.0. What is that? What comes to mind as you think about continuing to work on this series and expand it?
That's a very good question. I would like to include, without forcing it on anybody, I would like to include more of a cultural pantheon, expand from other backgrounds. I also, even though there are a couple of triple goddesses represented here, Hecate being one example, I feel like there's a pervasiveness of youth here. There's also, you don't see anyone here and the actual state of motherhood, which I do have a photo shoot set up with someone who's expecting, who wanted to participate. And so she'll be within that state. It's like this interesting tension between the creation of life, but also someone who has the power to unmake life, depending on which goddess you're looking at. So those are just some examples. I was telling someone that I would love a Baba Yaga. Even again, my way is not necessarily to go to someone and say, hey, I need you to be Baba Yaga. Can we do this? But I would love that. So there are definitely some, I shouldn't even call them gaps, but some areas to address. Also, one of the other things that I plan to do is have or possibly try to do, I should say, an audio component where I can talk to some of these individuals about their experiences. That's a good question, Austin. Thank you. Were there other questions or comments or thoughts? Oh, I should say too that it took at least, I want to say, about a month each of working with, month and a half of working with each individual to plan.
And what's your recruitment process? How do you find models to work with? Is it friends? Do you put calls out?
It was a mix. So I think I did say that this was something that I've been thinking about for 6 years. I do believe in projects having their gestation period. And I just sort of had a thought and I said, I'm not going to force it. I'm going to sit it on the shelf for now. And this model right here, actually, Kayla Marina or Kayla Manchester, she and I had worked before together previously, and she was pushing me. She really wanted to do a photo shoot. And this was last year, late summer. And I wasn't sure necessarily with COVID how to do this, even though I shoot primarily outside. I prefer to collaborate with nature, have nature be a part of the set. I really like that. working that way. And so I figured out, oh, well, I could shoot with my mask on and be outside and this will be no problem. And that photo in particular actually is funny because we're both in the water. And I'm in the water with 2 cameras around my neck, trying not to get them wet and trying not to slip and fall on rocks. And as it turns out, tea lights do what the hell they want. They do not stay put, and fabric and water does whatever it wants. And if you're not careful, someone could look like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. If you're, so there's some photos where it's just like, that's not the image you were going for. The water was cold, but then, eventually doable. And once I got home, it wasn't like we had plans to shoot Dark Goddess. She actually was the first. And once I got home and looked at them, it clicked. And I said, oh, this looks like it's the project. It's the idea that I wanted to do for a while. And I put something out on social media and people were responding and saying they wanted to do it. So it was definitely a mix. Right now I have a mother and daughter who we've been in talks about doing it. And she said, I'm offended you didn't ask me. And I said, well, I was, shy. I didn't quite, put out a large call. I actually recently told someone else, a couple of people actually said to me, they said, would you be willing to travel? Would you be willing to do X, Y, and Z? And I said, of course, absolutely. So, again, navigating this landscape is very interesting, but as things, as I can figure it out and navigate it, going to different locations to do something. So there's one curator artist who I told her, whatever she wanted to plan, because she likes putting on performances and shows. And I said, I'm totally game with whatever you come up with for Dark Goddess. So we're trying to figure what that's going to look like. And, that won't be for a while, though.
Hey, Shanta, I'm sort of a ringer in this, but I want to ask you a question that I've never asked you before. I'm Shanta's husband. And I'm a photographer as well. When did you start taking pictures? Like, what turned you on to this? Because I never asked you that, even though we've done a lot of shoots together.
Yeah. I stole my father's Nikon. I know that's not the politically correct thing to tell people. I stole my father's Nikon when I was going to college, and college was down the street, but I had to live on campus. It was a requirement of Trinity College, and I stole the Nikon. As luck would have it, it fell, and I had to put it in a shop. I never got it out of the shop, just being irresponsible. But what always stayed with me, I think we're all visual. I can't just say I'm visual as if me as opposed to other people and how other people sense and experience sound and images and the world. But things have always stuck with me, certain images, my memories, when I think of them, they're storylines in my head. Sometimes things that maybe shouldn't be funny are really funny to me because I see it as a storyline quickly in my head, almost like a film strip. And so that's kind of how I got started. I semi-serious, I guess, when I went to Uganda in 2007, I believe it was 2007, for business. And it was just a very cheap camera that I had, nowhere near the caliber of what I use now, and just took a bunch of pictures, brought them back. I used to work for Planned Parenthood. I created and implemented some of their programs with college campuses, and someone at the office said, I think you have another career, you have an eye. And this, again, a distance between that time and then going to India in 2011. And I remember that's when I bought my own Nikon instead of stealing it this time, for my father. And that I went to India and came back with 12,000 photos, a lot of highly viable photos. and sort of just, I think with a lot of things, feeling my way around towards calling myself a photographer, I guess.
I have two questions, and the first one, I wanted to note, just I loved your kind of genealogy of how your ways of seeing and the intertextuality of that visual culture, and it, you know, I had in that diagram of John Berger's ways of seeing, I remembered the famous quotation from him that says, "Men act and women appear. Men look at women. Women watch themselves being looked at.
Yeah.
This determines not only relations between men and women, but also the relation of women to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The surveyor of women in herself is male. The surveyed is female. Thus she turns herself into an object of vision, a sight." And I wondered how your photography is in some ways like speaking back to that, or blowing it open, or in an interesting dialogue or challenge to it.
That's a very good point. And it makes me also think about, I think her name is Laura Mulvey, who talked about the male gaze and coined the male gaze term, and in terms of film, and saying that the camera is male. And, you know, I mean, it's a hard question, because then it presupposes so many things, the idea of patriarchy, but then an idea of assuming that all men are at the top of that patriarchy in the food chain, and they are not. I don't experience patriarchy in that way, and for me, the whole idea of it is very different. And so that's a really good question and a tough one. I would like to think of my gaze not necessarily as male or female. I feel like my gaze just is, in terms of what I like to see, or what I'm attracted to, or even how I like to take pictures. I'm not saying that historically it hasn't been gendered, because it's gendered, as we all know, to what you're speaking to. But I'd like to think of it as different bodies, especially when we're thinking about brown bodies. And also the fact that the camera wasn't designed for certain kinds of pigments. We know that historically. I'd like to think of this as being the era in which people in any kind of body can remake or re-envision or shapeshift that gaze and that seeing. And again, even though the technology is what it is, I want to believe that we're becoming better at really interrogating that, and how we're, because even in thinking about the Eurocentric gaze, right? So I'll give you an example, because that's a problem too. Like, that's, to me, that's just as much of a problem as male gaze, is the very Eurocentric gaze, and how we're very attracted to the white skin, or trained and breastfeeding upon white skin. So there's, I love old Hollywood movies. Most of the Hollywood movies that you would see from back in the day do not feature. It either features someone brown in a really bad light in a whole range of different ethnicities. And that, again, understatement of the year. And so I think, again, I would like to believe that I'm constantly rethinking those things, but also working outside of those things, right? So that, you know, my models are of different backgrounds, you know, and trying to think of all sorts of bodies in different ways, if that makes any sense. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I mean, I, you know, like that John Berger quote, like, it's one of those things that it's cited all the time, but it's also reductive. And that point that you made about that you're shape shifting it, feels like a lot more exciting and interesting than that binary that he sets up. But the binary had to be set up, whatever, in 1976 in order for people to kind of get to that reductive level. But I like where you're going with it as a kind of explosion of the concept and a way of speaking back to it.
Yeah, and also too, like, I mean, when Laura Mulvey talked about the male gaze, again, we're thinking about the cis heteronormative language and ways that does not even begin to think about other kinds of bodies presented in other kinds of ways and harmful ways, or assumed to be, or erased. And so right now I'm teaching a media studies course at Putney School, and one of the points I'm planning to make with my students is, some of this stuff seems along the binary, but there are people actually like taking some of those ideas, but then going in another, like expanding upon. So when we talk about Mulvey's male gaze, talking about that, the harmfulness or control of the gaze in general, by whom, for whom. When we start to get into class, for example, presentations of class, then we're starting to see some very interesting things around looking and seeing.
So Shanta, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
I can't tell. That's really interesting, this discussion that you've just been having about John Berger and that pivotal book of his that influenced all of us greatly and still does.
Yeah.
And then the shape-shifting discussion and your sense that shape-shifting can be very almost a form of self-liberation. I like that also.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm thinking here, I'm held by these images, and I'm thinking these women, you've given these women who are in the photographs opportunities to show ways of being seen. So instead of ways of seeing, here we have choices. If I understand this correctly, choices of ways of being seen. And so I do want to know more from each of the women now because of that.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me feel compelled, a sort of compelling curiosity. Here you're choosing how you would like to be seen, by Shanta and by viewers of Shanta's work. And so what has this done for you? Again, you mentioned your work as in writing or visual work as a form of inquiry, which it is. And so there's another layer of inquiry that's going on here that makes your viewer really curious. I think you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, it is to a point where I am it's almost like a form of ekphrasis, because it's a way of thinking about, I'm still working my way around it, but having individuals think about these images and what it does for, like, because the other thing is too, I don't pose people. I don't like to pose people. That's the other thing. Sometimes it may come out where I'll say, oh, I think if you did like that, like acting out a pose and say, hey, I wonder how this is going to look. And other times I'm just thinking, I just want the person to be. Interestingly enough, a lot of people I've shot are very interested in being posed, which is very fascinating, where they'll say, just you give me direction, because somehow that relationship with the camera becomes, I have the power and I tell you what to do, when really I want to say, ignore me and pretend I'm not here. Now that journeys into a whole nother psychological bent around voyeurism, being seen, but this is about being seen with permission. and on their own terms, you know? And so I like to, it's a very interesting thing. And you're right about like the choices of being seen and how one wants to be seen. Because for far too long, especially for certain types of bodies and you know, if we're talking about women, definitely women being seen on the Odalisque, for example, you know, and there you are, you know, at the beck and call of a male who's like on the easel or doing what have you. And for me, I want to shift that in a big way and work with these individuals. Because I mean, and I do this with a lot of people too, because their image is their agency and parts of themselves. Thank you.
It seems to me, Shanta, more than subverting the male gaze, it seems to me offering a form of a liberation that could be pursued further.
Oh, of course.
Not I don't mean by you, but by
Yeah.
woman. By each woman could pursue this further.
Yeah.
So that there's a kind of a theater going on between the two of you, or a conversation. And it raises a lot of questions, you know, a lot of curiosity.
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I love that. Like, especially when you say theater, right? Like the stage and in some cases, the upper right, Jamie, on the railroad tracks, we actually did have audience that gathered. There are people, because that's the chance you take when you're outside and you're shooting. We're in the Berkshires and people gathered. And we were like, oh, we're sorry if we're in your way. And they were like, no. And, you know, one person was like, I'd love to be a dark goddess. Like people were just there and they were a part of the viewing and being, if that made sense. And, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like in terms of a certain kind of self-liberation and reimagining, re-envisioning, even for some people, they already have some of these things in their closet and they are all these beings. And for some, it's like, huh, okay, great. I get to explore a little bit, you know. I'm looking forward to finding out more actually when I talk to each of these individuals.
I have always thought of dark goddess sort of figures as having different kinds of agency than the ones that are immediately present in the world. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that your photographs are exploring that kind of agency and exploding the sense of agency that normally exists between sort of a person who's a subject and the photographer. And I wondered how that agency then changes when you remediate it into performance. So sort of extending this idea of the theater between you two, but you know, you and I, we talked a little bit about performance and it as a form of sort of reinterpreting these. And I wondered how your sense of remediation, maybe that sense of ekphrasis, like helps you trace those agencies that are particular to this sacred feminine, that are outside of the realm of language, outside of the realm of even being able to be sort of traced by human agency. Like we don't have the tools to do it because they're beyond that realm.
That's a really good point and question. And that's a very interesting question because I'm not even sure what I like. I like to look at all of these things as an opportunity to keep learning more or unzipping, right? And that question about like, how does the agency change in the realm of the performance? Or, you know, it also raises the question, once you put Dark Goddess on, and then do you take it off after the camera's off? And why do you feel like you have to take it off? Or what are the pressures and wishes, like why you're not, you know, why you would have to, right? and speaking of the sacred feminine, again, like this definitely is reaching and trying to go like underneath the layers of what we see, like the sacred feminine that is to be beheld, and in some cases rightfully feared, but not feared in a way in our modern world where it becomes feared and therefore a site to control, and a site to legislate, and a site to say this is very dangerous, we have to shut it down, right? But something that can just be in all of the glory of wildness and being. But I love that question. So I did write it down, and like all these questions and points about this, because the more I'm engaging with individuals about this exhibition, I learned, for example, I'm assuming that people knew some of the goddesses that were named that people wanted to be. In some cases, individuals chose their own deities. I assume that, but that's not a right assumption. One person said to me, they definitely wanted, I talked about the idea of a dark goddess book eventually, in something where, and this person lit up and they said that'd be great because I'm not familiar with these goddesses. And my assumption, because of some of the books either that I've read or that the things I've been drawn to, in the stories, I assume, well, isn't that just everyone knows about Kali, or everyone knows about, there are a number of, they're called Mahadevyas in the Indian tradition, where it's like one goddess that became 10 different goddesses, and their scale of horrid and intensity just quadruples. Some of them hang out near of the cremation pyre, according to some of the lore. So it's like, I assume, well, don't people just know? But this has also been a great opportunity to have these goddesses walk among us. They have the sacred feminine come out of the cave, or put us back into the cave to behold and enjoy, right? So no, these are really great questions, and I appreciate it, because it's giving me so much more material to sit with. And I definitely love being able to like step back and sit with and think about, and more inquiry about. Someone asked me recently, which dark goddess, like if I were to be a dark goddess, who would I be? And I don't know the answer to that. I think I have a couple of ways I could go. One way is I already live that life of being, I've been embracing my shadow self, even before it came a term being thrown around now in common culture. This is something that I've lived with and embraced, but in terms of that persona, I still have questions and explorations about that. This is so exciting. I'm so grateful to all of you who came, and your questions, Sarah and Alice, are just so juicy. Thank you. And Allison, thank you for being a great host. And I'm so grateful to the Southern Vermont Arts Center, because this is, again, like it got, like, even as I submitted my application for the solo exhibition, I was like, I'm not even sure if I'm going to be done, but like, if I do this, then I have to put something into the world. So this definitely pushed me.
Good. Right. And then more space became available. So it pushed you even further.
It pushed me even further. Dark goddesses get to do more things, and I'm very excited about it. So yeah, thank you both, or thank all of you for like just coming and spending your evening with me. I appreciate it. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Shanta.
I wanted to say, I love hearing you speak. Like I love hearing you think out loud in public. Like it's just such a remarkable, this has been an incredible hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you. And I actually love being the person who's not totally Like, I do not have I don't want to have the answers for all of this, because that would make it so boring and not learning. And you know, Sarah and I go back, and Sarah and I, Sarah and I have had so many different kinds of conversations about so many things. And she also has like posed many questions to me about all sorts of different things. And so, sorry to put you on the spot, Sarah, but it's like, I've been grateful for that, more of the, not the nudging, but the questions, the really things that are just, that have so many textures to it. And as I thought about the artist talk, I'm like, okay, how do I want this to look, or what do I want people to experience or to know me in terms of what's behind this? Because obviously there's some other layers underneath it, and my ways of seeing and my own visual culture.
Well, should we leave it there?
I think we should leave it there.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get this recording up on our website soon. And Shanta, Sarah, Alice, Plain, please help share it. And Shanta,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for all the work you put into the presentation, into the exhibition. And I'll see you on Friday.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful. Thank you for coming.